Most tomato mistakes don't kill your plants. Your tomato plant can be tall, green, and look perfectly healthy while making mistake after mistake that cuts your harvest in half. So in this video, I'm going to show you 10 tomato growing mistakes that can dramatically reduce your harvest and, more importantly, how to avoid them. Let's start with one of the most common mistakes of all, planting too early. Now you're probably past planting time right now, but I'm going to cover this pretty quickly because some people might not be. I know exactly why people plant too early. You've been waiting all winter to get back into the garden. The weather starts warming up a little bit. You walk through the garden center and there are tomato plants everywhere. And you think, I'll plant now and I'll get tomatoes sooner. Unfortunately, that's not what happens. Tomatoes are warm season crops. They love warm soil, warm days, and warm nights. If you put them into cold soil too early in the season, they often just sit there. Sometimes they'll survive, most times they will. Sometimes they'll even look okay, but they're not really growing. And what many gardeners don't realize is that cold stress early in a tomato plant's life can set it back for weeks. Instead of getting a head start, you've actually slowed the plant down. I've seen gardeners plant tomatoes a month earlier than they should, only to be passed up by someone who planted at the right time. The better approach is to wait until your danger of frost has passed and your soil has started warming up. Tomatoes really take off when conditions are consistently warm. Now, once you've planted at the right time, the next mistake can turn even a healthy tomato plant into an unproductive mess. This is one of the biggest harvest killers I see. A lot of gardeners put their tomato plant in the ground, maybe put it in a small cage, and then let it do its thing, do what it wants to do. The problem is most tomato plants, especially indeterminate varieties, don't naturally grow into neat little bushes. They keep growing and growing. They produce new stems, new leaves, and before long you've got a giant tangled mass of vegetation. At first it looks impressive, but underneath all that growth, problems start developing. Airflow decreases, disease pressure increases, harvesting becomes more difficult, pests are harder to manage way deep inside that plant, and plants start putting energy into growing more vegetation instead of focusing that energy where you want it, producing tomatoes. This is why I recommend growing indeterminate tomatoes vertically whenever possible. Growing vertically allows me to fit more plants into the same space, improve airflow, make harvesting easier, and keep the plants manageable all season long. Pruning is an important part of this. If you're growing indeterminate tomatoes and not cherry tomatoes, removing side growth can help direct more of the plant's energy into the main stem and fruit production. All along that main stem, you're going to see leaves, and in the junction between the leaves and the stem are little sprouts, little tiny bits of growth, side shoots. And the fact is, they don't produce much, if any, fruit, depending on the variety. So by taking those out, you're focusing the flowers that actually grow directly off of the main stem to produce more fruit. Now, typically grown this way, you can space your tomatoes only 12 to 15 inches apart instead of 2 to 3 feet apart for regular bush-grown tomatoes. So it allows you to get more variety and more plants into a smaller area, and the plants produce more. Typically when you grow this way, you let the tomato grow all the way to the top of the string or the stake or whatever you're growing it up. And these strings, if you're growing on strings, can be attached to a trellis overhead, anything that's up above. The eaves of your house work on a south-facing wall. But when the tomato gets to the top of that string or stake, you're going to cut the top of that tomato off because you need to now focus the attention of that tomato on ripening the fruit it's already produced. Now, this is in a short season climate. If you're zone 7 and above, you can grow it further than this. Now, you've already reached the top of the string or the stake, and what happens at that point is the tomato starts to turn down on itself. And if it doesn't snap off, which usually it will do when it's loaded with fruit, it starts to crowd out the other plants, it starts to decrease airflow, and starts to increase disease and pests. So, what do we do to make sure that doesn't happen, but we can still continue growing? We use these tomato hooks. Now, tomato hooks are used the same way. The strings are anchored at the base, either buried under the plant, or if you've already planted, you can insert a landscape staple at the base of the plant and tie the string onto that. Give it a few twists around the plant and hook your hook on whatever vertical support you have. Then all season, the same way as you would have done before, every few days, wrap the tomato vine around that string. Keep pinching out the side growth. And once the vine reaches the top of the string or the hook, this is where it gets different. Now this is for gardeners in zones 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Instead of cutting the plant off there or letting it get long, gangly, and intrusive, what we're gonna do is just simply take the hook down, let out some line, put the hook back. Now you've just added another foot or two of growing space. And when it reaches the top again, you do the same thing. So you can grow these tomatoes all the way through the season. If you are like we are here in San Diego, you can grow these all the way up through the winter. Now I have a whole video on exactly how to do this. I will leave that down below. We do have the tomato hooks in our shop. I'll leave that link as well. We have sourced the best hooks for the lowest price that I have found on the internet. We've been carrying them for years. I'll leave that link down there and you guys are really gonna love this. Mistake number 3 is something many gardeners don't realize until the season is well underway or sometimes almost over. Growing tomatoes in too little sun. Tomatoes are one of the most sun-hungry crops we grow, yet every year people try growing them in locations that only receive a few hours of sunlight per day. The plant will survive, even in pretty decent shade. It grows, it may even look reasonably healthy, but the harvest never reaches its potential. It will produce fewer tomatoes and smaller tomatoes. When tomatoes don't receive enough sunlight, they often become leggy and stretched out as they search for more light. Flower production can decline, therefore fruit production can decline as well, and fruit quality can suffer also. The sun is what gives the tomatoes their intense flavor. So if you're growing them in shade, you're gonna get less fruit, and the taste is probably gonna be closer to grocery store than homegrown. So if you're trying to maximize production, give the tomatoes the sunniest location you have available in most climates. You want 6 to 8 hours of sun a day or more, unless you are in the southern states, Texas for sure, but a lot of the southern states, a little bit of afternoon shade is going to help. 6 hours is still probably what you want to aim for, but you're going to get best performance that way. The more sun your tomato plants receive, the better they'll perform. But for most gardeners, insufficient sunlight is a major reason tomato plants underperform. Now let's talk about another mistake that often affects container gardeners. If you're growing tomatoes in containers, using containers that are too small is a huge problem. Tomatoes develop large root systems. The more root space they have, the easier it is for them to access water and nutrients. When roots become crowded, the plant becomes more dependent on you. You'll need to water more often, you'll need to fertilize more often, and the plant becomes less forgiving if you miss a day. If you're growing larger indeterminate varieties, don't be afraid to use larger containers. I would recommend 10 gallons minimum, but the bigger, the better. Tomatoes like consistent soil moisture. Now, that doesn't mean the soil should stay soaking wet all the time. In fact, tomatoes hate sitting in waterlogged soil. But they also don't appreciate swinging back and forth between drought conditions and flooding. That's exactly what happens in a lot of gardens. The soil dries out completely, the plant becomes stressed, and then the gardener realizes what's happened and gives it a huge amount of water all at once. Those constant swings create problems. One of the most common is blossom end rot. That's that ugly black spot that develops on the bottom of the fruit. Cracking is another issue, and severe water stress can cause flowers to drop before they ever develop into tomatoes. The goal is to keep soil moisture as consistent as possible. A good layer of mulch helps, which we'll talk about in a minute. Drip irrigation helps. Larger containers help if you're growing in containers. But the biggest thing is simply paying attention before the plant becomes severely stressed. A tomato plant that is consistently wilting in the afternoon is telling you something. Don't ignore it. Number 6 is using the wrong fertilizer. This is one of those mistakes that's easy to make because many gardeners assume that more fertilizer automatically means more tomatoes. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. In fact, some fertilizers can actually reduce production if they're used incorrectly. The biggest culprit is too much nitrogen. Now, nitrogen is the first number of the 3 numbers that you will see on a fertilizer box or bag. And nitrogen encourages leafy green growth. That's great when you're growing lettuce. It's great when you're growing spinach. But with tomatoes, too much nitrogen can create giant, beautiful plants that don't produce nearly as much fruit as they should. And that's because the plant's investing most of its energy into foliage instead of fruit production. Tomatoes need balanced nutrition. They need nitrogen, but they also need phosphorus, potassium, and all the other micronutrients required for healthy growth and fruit development. As you know, if you've seen many of my videos, I love Neptune's Harvest. It's what I've been using for about 8 years. It's organic, it's well balanced. At planting time, I use a mix of their kelp meal and their crab and lobster meal. And it's a good initial form of nutrients for the plant, but it also is a little bit of a long-term feed. And then once you get into the season and you start to see flowers and fruit developing, I add the Neptune's Harvest tomato and veg formula. And that is great because it's made for what tomatoes need. First of all, the nutrients and micronutrients are there, but there's actually molasses in it that feed the organisms in the soil. And when you have more organisms in the soil that are healthy, you actually can fertilize less because they're helping to deliver the fertilizer into the plant. It also has yucca extract, and that is great because that is a natural wetting agent. It helps keep the roots moist. This is what we've been talking about, right? Keeping that consistent moisture in the plant. So that helps with that too. So I'll leave this down below, a link. We have the Neptune's Harvest in our shop. I use Neptune's Harvest tomato and veg every 2 to 3 weeks during the summer. So using the right fertilizer is more important than using a lot. In fact, don't fall into the trap that if a little fertilizer is good, a lot must be better, because with tomatoes, it's definitely not the case. Number 7 often starts with good intentions. A gardener wants a bigger harvest. They have limited space, so they think, if one tomato plant is good, I could probably fit 2 here and I'd get more tomatoes, twice as many tomatoes. Then they squeeze the plants closer and closer together. Unfortunately, it's not going to do what they hope it's going to do. When tomato plants are overcrowded, they compete for sunlight, they compete for nutrients, airflow decreases, humidity increases within the canopy. And all that together makes pest and disease problems a lot more rampant. And just maintaining the plant alone becomes much more difficult. Pruning is harder, harvesting is harder, finding hornworms is harder. Everything becomes harder. And while it might seem like you're increasing production by cramming more plants into a space, you're actually going to reduce your overall performance. Giving tomato plants enough room to grow is one of the simplest ways to keep them healthy and productive. This is why I love growing vertically. You can still fit many tomatoes in a smaller space without all the problems that come with it. All right, number 8 is trying to grow tomatoes through extreme summer heat. I'm talking about the South again. A lot of Southern gardeners assume that tomatoes love warm weather, so they must love extremely hot weather too. But there is a limit. If you've been in Texas and tried to grow tomatoes, you know that by about June, your plants are getting fried. Once temperatures start climbing into the upper 90s and beyond, tomatoes often begin to struggle. One of the most frustrating things you'll see is blossom drop. The flowers form, everything looks promising, and then the flowers fall off without producing fruit. The plant itself may still look healthy for a little while. The leaves might be green, but fruit production slows because there's no flowers. This is especially common in areas where summer temperatures stay extremely high for extended periods, and especially through the nighttime. In these areas, you want to start your tomatoes indoors very early, get them out as soon as possible, and then grow them through about this time. Harvest what you can, and unfortunately probably give up. Now, if you're in kind of one of these saddle zones, you can put shade cloth over the tomatoes in the afternoon or all day, depending on how warm it is. And that can get them through the summer. They're probably gonna still back off on production, but they will pick up again once the weather cools off in the fall. Now, if you're in the deep south and your tomato time is ending right now, you can pick it up again by starting them indoors in late summer, getting them out in early fall, and then growing them, through the cool weather or cooler weather until it's just too late in late fall, early winter to grow them anymore. Understanding just this can save you a lot of frustration. Sometimes the problem isn't you, it's just too hot. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you probably knew this one was coming. Mulch does so many good things for tomatoes. It helps conserve moisture, it reduces soil temperature swings, it suppresses weeds, it reduces soil splashing onto the leaves during watering and rain, which can help reduce a lot of diseases. And most importantly, it helps create a more consistent growing condition. Remember when we talked about watering consistency? Mulch is one of the easiest ways to improve it. Without mulch, the sun hits the soil directly, moisture evaporates more quickly, and then the soil heats up faster, and you'll generally spend more time watering. A simple 2-inch layer of mulch can make a surprisingly large difference throughout the growing season. Number 10 is growing the wrong variety for your climate. This mistake doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Every year, gardeners see beautiful pictures on a seed catalog and decide that's the variety they're going to grow. And sometimes that's perfectly fine, but sometimes that variety simply isn't well suited for their climate. For example, many gardeners in hot climates struggle with large beefsteak tomatoes. Can they grow them? They can, but they may find smaller fruited varieties are more productive, more reliable, and easier to grow. Likewise, gardeners with shorter growing seasons often benefit from choosing varieties that mature quickly. The point is that not all tomatoes perform equally in all locations. A variety that produces incredible harvests in one region may struggle in another. That's why it's helpful to experiment, to ask your neighbors who garden, grow a few different varieties each season, and take notes. I do have a video I will link below that goes over several regions of the United States and what exact varieties would be good for you. Also, I mentioned it earlier, I have a video, I'm going to link it right here, on how to grow tomatoes vertically, which is going to get you the best results possible. I'll see you guys next time.